Thank you all so incredibly much for choosing to spend your rainy spring afternoon with us here at the Highlands Center for Natural History. Is anyone just reveling like I am in the sweet petrichor scent of the earth rising up to meet us with this spring rain? Oh, it's so allergies. Well, it knocks down the allergens. You see, that's how that works. So I hope that you were greeted with the nice aroma of the pine forest upon arrival. And I trust that our time together this afternoon for the next hour, hour and a half will be meaningful and well spent. Much like we are fortunate to live in a very biodiverse area that we call the Central Highlands ecoregion of Arizona, we acknowledge that there's a lot of diversity among us in our audience today. Some of you have been here so many times that the Highlands Center could be your second address. For some of you, it's the first time you're visiting today. So I don't want to take anything for granted and just want to let you know a little bit about what we're about as we get started here up front. First things first, the very most important detail, okay, but where are the restrooms, right? Please take care of yourselves during our time together. If you do need to scoot out, you can exit through the door that you came in or through our store. There's a building past a beautiful sculpture back there that says restrooms on the side of it. So that's the answer to that very important detail. My name is Maria Eisnagel. I'm the Education Director here at the Highlands Center. We are a nature center, as you might have gathered, on about 80 acres of Prescott National Forest land. We exist on special use permit through Prescott National Forest. We've been around since the 90s. We've been on this site since 2007, 2008. And though Prescott National Forest is a close partner of ours, we are not funded through government funds at all. We are a typical nonprofit, and we thrive on memberships, donations, and programs like today. There's no expectation to give. If you find yourself in feeling like you would like to give a donation, please do feel free to do so. You can check out our table on your way out. There's a donation bowl there. There's also information on becoming a member. There's information on upcoming programs. Please take a moment to pause at our flyers. All this information is available on our website as well. And we do have a sign-up sheet for email notifications if you'd like to stay in touch with us that way. I want to put a plug in for a program coming up this weekend. Author Shelby Tisdale is coming to us from Tucson, and she will be giving a presentation on the life of architect Marjorie F. Lambert and talking about her book, No Place for a Lady, and Peregrine Book Company will be partnering with us to provide books for a book signing afterwards. So please check that out. There is still some space available for that. Having said all of that, one quick other note, we're here because we like to help people connect with nature in like all kinds of ways. From young to old, everything in between. We hope to help children and adults discover the wonders of nature and become wise caretakers of the land. So today is one of those ways in which we are fulfilling that mission. So without further ado, I'd like to turn the mic over to Greg Murray, who comes to us as a member of Central Arizona Wildlife Alliance. He is also a Highland Center volunteer and an Arizona Master Naturalist, and he will be introducing our speaker for today.
No, I don't have to press it. So just a little bit about the Central Arizona Wildlife Alliance. It's not surprising that you haven't heard about it. It's about a year old or so. But the Central Arizona Wildlife Alliance envisions a Central Arizona where wildlife and people thrive together to ensure a healthy wildlife population overall and the health, environmental, and economic benefits that they bring. We envision interconnected open space across public, agricultural, and residential lands protected in mission statement or vision. So it's my great pleasure now to invite or to introduce our speaker. Jeff Gagnon has worked for the Arizona Game and Fish Department for over 25 years. He's currently the program lead for Arizona Game and Fish Department's highway. Kind of a weird connection. The Highways and Wildlife Connectivity Program, specializing in wildlife collision mitigation and habitat connectivity related projects. Sorry about this. You think it sorry about that. Anyway, he's the lead for vehicle collision mitigation and habitat connectivity projects, including. Would it be better if I just Anyway, he's the lead in specializing in wildlife vehicle collision mitigation and habitat connectivity related projects, including Interstate 17, Route 260, and the U.S. Highway 93 wildlife crossings. He studied at Northern Arizona University in Flagstaff, and he's the author of numerous scientific publications about the interactions of wildlife habitat, and transportation systems. So please join me in giving a warm welcome to Jeff to the Highland Center.
Thank you, Greg. So can everybody in the back hear me okay? Okay. A little louder? Okay. Remind me. Okay. Okay, so I'm going to run out of gas. I got 102 slides, so I have to yell for a long time. All right, so one of the things I wanted to say before I started is I actually, when I was a little kid, I grew up in Prescott Valley, so I'm familiar with what it looked like out there. I grew up off on Sunset Lane, which was a nice slow road when I grew up there, and there was, a school out there I went to in the middle of a field, and there was a donut hole, and that was about it out there. So I kind of saw what pronghorn habitat, good pronghorn habitat looked like in some of this area, and then how it's developed and grown, and it's been interesting to watch. Then I moved to Flagstaff and started doing some of the work. I have been up there, but I've always had a place in my heart for the Prescott area, partly because I did grow up here for part of my childhood. So today I'm going to talk about pronghorn connectivity in north central Arizona, challenges and potential solutions. I wanted to expand this outside of Prescott and Prescott Valley area because there is a connection there. Let me see if I can get this thing to work real quick. Okay, guess we'll do it this way. No, it's not moving at all. Yeah, I'm pointing at it. It just wouldn't work the first time. All right, so here we go. So I want to talk about wildlife habitat fragmentation. A lot of people understand wildlife vehicle collisions. You hit an animal, a lot of animals get hit on the road, but habitat fragmentation is one of the things that's more prominent for pronghorn. We'll talk about some of the challenges and solutions. For example, roads and fences, juniper encroachment in grasslands, development, and I want to link this to pronghorn connectivity across northern Arizona so you can see how the Prescott area fits into this. But all of these challenges and solutions can fit in this area, but there's some good examples in other areas as we work on this. So a lot of you know that the world is growing and the roads are expanding. There's more and more roads. And this is an old map. Some of the roads on there, there's even more roads on there. So as you can see, roads are starting to, or have been for years, cutting across areas like Arizona, Prescott Valley. One of the things we run into is wildlife vehicle collisions. We know there's a safety concern there, and this is just one example. But we also see a loss of different wildlife species on the roads. So like I said, a lot of us see animals dead on the road. This is one of the things that comes with roads and fragmentation. And there's a lot of a lot of other things that come with that. A lot of people get hurt. But then when you get into, as this growth happens, you can see this is an old map, growth from 2005 to 2050. It's an old map. And every now and when I put it up there, I say, yeah, this is an old map, but someday this is going to be reality. And so we're growing. So this is what's coming with it. And what comes with that are railroads, canals, renewable energy, urban sprawl, a lot of stuff that comes with that takes up more and more areas where wildlife exists. So this is causes of habitat fragmentation. Proper planning can help us coexist with wildlife. So that's some of the things we try to do as we work to coexist with wildlife as we grow. And so habitat fragmentation is basically putting those roads or developments or whatever it may be in areas where animals can't move. They can't get to food, water, cover, mates. There's a lot of things that can come with that eventually. And so what you see, here's an example of fragmentation. So when you take and put roads through an area, for example, more and more roads, it cuts it up into smaller and smaller areas and makes it harder for species to survive. So this example I like to give is if you're living in that larger patch of land, say that's your town or your city, and you can go to the store and get groceries or go to the restaurant or whatever it may be, and then all of a sudden there's a barrier between you and the rest of town, and now you're on your... Okay, is that working now? Okay, maybe I don't have to yell so loud. If you're in this, go to the smaller ones there, the four in the middle, now you're stuck in your own block, and you can go to the convenience store around the corner and to get your resources that you may need to survive with nachos or whatever it is. And then you get down to these smaller areas, and eventually you're in your house and you can't go anywhere. And so that's what happens to some wildlife. They get to a point where they can't survive because their habitat's been chopped up so much or degraded so much that they don't have a place to live, and they can't get from point A to point B. So now that we know some of the impacts of human development on wildlife, what can we do about it? So talking specifically, talking about pronghorn in northern Arizona, I say that the Grand Canyon to Prescott area, because this is what we're going to be talking about today, is kind of the connections between pronghorn and some of the solutions and challenges that we see. One of the things we've been doing for a lot of years is putting GPS collars on pronghorn. This is one of the best parts of my job. Go out and put a collar on them, see where they go. They collect locations every 2 hours, and it makes it easy to make decisions on where to maybe put in mitigation, or it lets us learn where the migration corridors are, how roads affect them. There's all kinds of stuff you can learn every time you put collars on these animals. So as I get into this, I'll be showing these GPS maps. I wanted to show that how we got that data, and that was just a quick example of that. So challenges and solutions. So the first challenge I'm talking about is roads and fences. They're kind of interrelated in some cases, not always. But what we've seen going back through all of our game and fish studies, each color up here is GPS locations, but it's of a different study. So each study is broken up. And what you see is that all of our studies, the pronghorn are not getting across major roadways. So they're completely fragmented already by these major roadways and getting more and more fragmented. And our population is stable, but it's nothing compared to like Wyoming's population, which is we're 1% to 2% of Wyoming's population of pronghorn. So we don't have as many pronghorn here, just the way it is. So historically there were more pronghorn here. But what I wanted to talk about now is I'm going to start up on the north end here and show you how the pronghorn in Prescott connect to the pronghorn up there, and all the challenges that I'm showing you can be applied anywhere. So starting up along Highway 89 and heading down towards I-40, we did some GPS movement studies in the Wapaki area, north of Flagstaff. So in this case, let's see if I can... This case, we've got each color in this case is one animal. So you can see where that yellow animal is, the blue animal is. This is a total of 37 animals, 121,000 GPS locations. So these are the animals that were caught on the right side of the road. At the time, this was a 2-lane road. Traffic volumes are running around 7,000 to 8,000 cars a day. And so you can see the animals on the right side of the road that were caught, and then the ones on the left side of the road. One animal did get across. But you can see that that road was almost pretty much a complete barrier to pronghorn, which is, surprising to a lot of people. We knew there was some fragmentation issues, but when you start looking at the GPS movement data, it really sends the point home. So as we were looking closer at this data, when we were working on that study, we started seeing just the boundary fences, how big of a issue boundary fences are to pronghorn. So this is the national forest boundary right here. And then you can see how these animals, this is just a couple of examples of how those animals are fragmented by fences that aren't pronghorn friendly, which I'll talk about in a little bit. So one of the things we did during that study is we actually collected the genetic samples from the animals that we're catching while we're flying the helicopters and catching them, but also from harvested animals. And one of my colleagues did his master's work with NAU on this and looked at genetics across different traffic volume roads. So here's a Highway 64. The traffic volume is, here, basically the red is the most traffic and the green is the least traffic and the yellow is kind of in the middle there. So we looked at genetic samples across this and saw genetically different populations across the highest traffic volume roads. And so one of the things that was part of what caused this is back in the 60s, there was a major snowstorm that caused pronghorn to be forced up against fenced roads, and it killed off about, in some populations, 70 to 80% of the animals. And we actually saw this happen in Wyoming. A lot of animals got killed last year. Same deal. They can't get across the barrier. That's another major issue of fragmentation, not being able to move to areas where you can survive. So in early 2009, we took the area within Wapaki and we actually removed that fence. So the right-of-way goes through here, but because the Wapaki boundary fence was there was no cattle here. So we said, let's try to remove the fence and see what happens. So if you look here, this is the data before. You can see the road going through here. Had one animal cross. That was that one orange animal I showed you earlier. And you see these animals on the east side of the road and the west side of the road. One thing I want you to notice here is look how sparse these points are up here. And you can kind of see the barriers. So what we did is we modified fences and we pulled right-of-way fence in this area. And then we were able to, before we started at 37 of the pronghorn, we had one pronghorn crossing. Afterwards, we had 8 of 17 pronghorn collar cross this road by removing the fences. What you also see here now is look at the movement. Like this is private land, so we weren't able to modify that, but you can see the areas we did modify. Now those animals are moving up into these areas and they're able to have connectivity across that. So we were excited about that. So let's take all of our data. Let's go pick points along roads in northern Arizona and see if we can do the same thing. See if we can get, sometimes we can't remove the fence because of livestock, but you can modify the fence so it's more pronghorn friendly so they can still cross. So we picked a lot of areas using these maps. We worked with the Forest Service and ADOT and started working on fences, modifying, pulling back fences. And this is an Arizona Animal Foundation. They come out once a year up on the projects I work on. This year it's in August, early August, doing some fences near one of our new wildlife crossings that's coming in for pronghorn. So they'd come out and we would work with other partners to, some cases we'd pull the right-of-way fence back and make it friendly, pronghorn friendly. So these animals are staging and they're crossing a fence and then a road and then a fence versus trying to cross a fence, a road, and a fence at the same time. Some instances we're making modifications. And to show you, pronghorn, they don't like to jump over fences most of the time. Probably 95% of the time or more, they go under. And so this is what it looks like. A fence that a pronghorn can go under. This is down in the Sedona area, and you can see how they go under these fences and why it's important that they can get under them. So even that's a little bit of a challenge. But what happens is if that fence had been another 3 inches lower, that pronghorn wouldn't have got through there, and it would have stayed on that side of the road. So we try to get our wires at least 18 inches, if not 20 inches, smooth bottom wire when we're working in pronghorn habitat. So, this good fences make good neighbors, bad fences make dead pronghorn. So this is an example of an area where the fence is, most animals' home ranges don't look like this, but that's what these look like. because it's a fence that's impermeable to pronghorn. So those are some of the things to just keep in mind when you're working on fences. So we continue to do work across northern Arizona. These are projects and years, and we call this the North of I-40 project. And we did as much work as we could working with various landowners and the Forest Service and Babbitt Ranches and various other members up there. And so we came out and we collared animals again. We did all that work, collared animals again in 2014. And we had I think we had another 120 animals collared or something like that. So what we saw is did what we do work? All this work we did it work? Well, on some of the lower volume roads, like 180, this is an area where we did 3 projects where we kind of had the data, and actually this is one animal that crossed at 3 of those projects on 180 where we modified the fences. So that's great. This is going basically up from almost to the Grand Canyon, a little bit south, down to Sitgreave, close to I-40 down here. So that's one of the things we did see during that time, 2007, 2008, the traffic volumes were lower. And by the time we did the second project, the traffic volumes had gone up substantially. So this is park visitation, national park visitation by year 2007 to 2017. So you can see this kind of exponential growth of people coming into the parks. So we wanted to look at what traffic volumes were these animals crossing at and not crossing at. So took all the data we had and I looked at the ability of animals, basically how many animals approach the road versus how many cross. So say you have 50 animals approach a road at a given traffic volume, and out of 100 animals or 50 animals that approach and 25 cross, that'd be about 50% of them, or 50% passage rate. But what I want to show you is these ones that are in red. Those are some of the ones in the Prescott Valley area. So they were included in this analysis, and you can see basically our traffic volumes are from 800 cars a day all the way up to 33,000 cars a day along these various roads in different years too. So what we saw basically, this is that percentage of pronghorn that cross is at 70% when traffic volume is less than 1,000. When you hit about 5,000 cars a day, it becomes a complete barrier to pronghorn. So that's, so in the Prescott area, there's a few roads in here and there's a few up here, but some of them are already barriers and some of them still have potential. But basically 5,000 cars, nearly a complete barrier. So one of the things we recommend now is if we have, if there's a road where we think we can just modify the fence and animals can get across, we look at about 3,500 cars a day to be able to do that. If you get into that 3,500 to 5,000, you can do some modifications. You might still get some crossings, but eventually you should start planning for wildlife crossings. And then if you get over 5,000 for pronghorn, you pretty much need to really start thinking about the crossings in that case. So that was good information, because when we redid our study in Flagstaff, we actually saw a lot of those animals didn't cross the higher traffic volume roads that we'd worked on, because the traffic volumes went up before we were able to realize any benefit of that. So basically what we see is that's that graph. This is a theoretical model of kind of that same graph. And if you have animals that are migratory, like in Wyoming, for example, they make those migrations, they're going to probably cross a little bit higher traffic volume road than say the pronghorn right here locally. If the fences are more pronghorn friendly, you might be able to bump that up a little bit. But ultimately, there comes a time when the traffic volume becomes just a barrier to those animals and they can't get across. So solutions are like wildlife crossings. So this is one in Wyoming. They have pronghorn specific wildlife crossings there and they work really well. That's an example of that. So that's more of a long-term solution for those. So looking at wildlife crossing and fencing, how do you reduce wildlife vehicle collisions and maintain habitat connectivity? And I'm using the Bighorn Sheep, Highway 93 Bighorn Sheep project, because it's closer to what we would see how pronghorn kind of act a little bit. They're more open animals. They like to see around them and prefer different types of structures. So like for Highway 93, we did the same thing. We caught a bunch of bighorn sheep going back a long time and collecting data along the way. And we identified 3 areas. This got a little bit thrown off, but we identified 3 areas where we wanted to put wildlife crossings using that GPS data. And ultimately, we ended up building 3 overpasses. And the reason we did that is because we had tried underpasses on the southern mountain range, part of this same mountain range. And those underpasses, we had 32 total crossings by sheep in 2 years, and no females or young. So we said, okay, these sheep like to be up higher, like to be more open, kind of like Pronghorn. So we built overpasses, 3 of them up there on Highway 93. And so what did we see pretty quickly is we started seeing animals cross, and you can see this is a female with young, and I don't know if you're in the back, but you can see that lamb that's like an hour old coming across there. So it was good to see that, and ultimately we saw more than 6,000 sheep cross those overpasses, those 3 overpasses, and so it was a huge success. And and so that's kind of the direction we're going. And I'd like to say too, I didn't put this in here, but we were averaging on Highway 93, which used to, those of you that go up there used to go across the dam. So that road, the old road, had about 12 sheep killed per year on it. We once we did this project and did some modifications, fixed some gaps, we haven't had a sheep killed on that road since 2014. So it's been highly successful. So all right, so now we've already made this move, so I'll just do it again since everybody liked it so much. Getting down to I-40, I mentioned the accidents. So I bring up the accidents again because this is an important impetus. This is elk. This isn't pronghorn causing these accidents. Pronghorn don't really get on the road all that much. They do occasionally. They did occasionally, but not a ton. This is mainly an elk vehicle collision area. And we see along I-40 and I-17, especially this is on I-40, we see as many as 100 elk and deer killed per year on I-40 from Flagstaff to Williams. So you see, basically we're working with ADOT on some of these roads that I show, I-17, I-40, Sierra 64. Back in the mid-2000s, we started working on plans to, when they were going to upgrade these roads, to put in wildlife crossings and fencing and things to make them be able to have wildlife features in them. So we've collared a bunch of elk and collected a bunch of collision data and came up with some recommendations for wildlife crossings. It just so happens one of the wildlife crossings from that planning effort was on I-40, which also would benefit pronghorn. So because there was a safety concern from ADOT's perspective, there's also going to be a benefit for pronghorn in this perspective. So this particular herd, this is about, I think, 250 animals total. On the north side, all of the animals that were caught on the north side are in green. All of the animals that were caught on the south side are in red. We had 0 crossings of I-40 as far back as we know on I-40 in this area. So I-40 is just too much for them. They can't take it. So we propose an overpass in this area, and we're actually designing it. What's interesting here is the road is unbundled from the railroad tracks, which is unbundled from Route 66. So it gives them an opportunity to cross the tracks, and then we go over an overpass, and then they can cross Route 66, which makes it a lot easier for them to do than trying to cross all of those or trying to take a wildlife crossing across all of those. So I want you to notice this meadow right here, and then I want you to notice this patch of green, and then another meadow up here, and then as you get up into this, there's some treatments that have been used to modified for pronghorn use in the future. But this is that meadow. This is GPS collar data, so that's that meadow right there. And these are the animals that cross the tracks, and they're coming right up to that location. So it's almost like the floodgates are waiting to open on that. And so we're working on trying to get a crossing in there sometime in the near future. I mentioned that green patch. You can see the meadow here and the meadow down here. So once they go across the overpass, you've got this area that they got to travel through. Pronghorn don't really like to travel through thick trees when they can help it, but they will on occasion. But what we did is we worked with the Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation and the Kaibab National Forest. This is the after on that, to open that up. So now we've got these meadows connected all the way up into the Forest Restoration Initiative treatments, which are also, some of that's guided by pronghorn data. So you've got this larger scale connectivity once we get that crossing in there. So you can see this is the overpass location. This is some of the Forest Service folks I work with, but there's semis passing underneath this cut slope to give you an idea. So you can see how, if you connected that with a crossing, how easily, how natural that would be for them. So I see that as going going to be a good success if that all comes together. One of the things that has come out recently, this is 2019, is the Secretarial Order 3362, which is basically looking at big game migrations in winter range. And the idea is to protect those. And this, like I said, this came out in 2019. And since then, we've created an action plan every year. And within that action plan, we also work with USGS to map migrations in the Western United States. And there's a bunch of these. There's 2020, 2022, there's a 2023 and 2024 now. There's another one coming out after that. But the Western states have put these migration routes in these volumes. And so, like I said, Secretarial Order 3362 is improving habitat quality in Western big game winter range and migration corridors. This looks at research needs for additional GPS data collection, which we did some of that, but also identifying important migration corridors for implementation of improvements on those corridors or winter range. So one of the areas we identified was the Grand Canyon to Prescott priority corridor. So this is memorialized in our action plan. So we can look at projects within that, and it's supported by this. Some of the work we're doing there is supported by that. So I showed you the pronghorn migrations north of I-40. You can see that's what that looks like if you're looking just at the migration corridors. You know, there's a whole bunch of data there, but these are the longer range migration corridors on the north side, and then these are the use and migration corridors on the south side of I-40. And we did most of our captures up in here and up here. So it starts to run out in Prescott. There's plenty of pronghorn there, but we can't color every animal. So you just have to understand there's a bunch of pronghorn down there. So one of the things that this leads to is juniper encroachments into grasslands and how that, you could say a lot of vegetation. Juniper's not is only one of them, but what happens is animals have a harder time moving through these areas if it gets encroached with things like juniper. And so one of the groups that's working together is the Northern Arizona Landscape Connectivity Alliance. What that is biologists and members of the Prescott, the Coconino, and the Kaibab National Forests, and Game and Fish. And we have a couple other partners that also are involved with that. And we're looking at larger landscape scale connectivity, trying not to make it, oh, just because the Coconino boundary ends here, we're gonna stop management here. It's trying to bring all of these together. And so they signed a document, said we'll work together on connectivity. That's been going on so this is 2021 that this was signed. And so one of our focus areas was this pronghorn herd I was talking about, south of, I call the South of I-40 project. It summers on the Coconino, passes through the Kaibab, and winters on the Prescott. And there's there's year-round animals here, there's year-round animals here, but there's this connectivity among all those herds. And so we chose this particular herd for this NALCA kickoff because it went across all three forests and we were able to see a common goal with that. And so this is the GPS data that we have for that. Let me see okay, we're doing good. So we can see the movements. Each one of these colors is an individual animal, and then you can see the lines where they go through there. So I'm going to go down. As we come down, we get to I-40. If those animals on the south side of I-40 making these movements, we start to see hot spots and areas that they spend more time in. So these are the pronghorn core areas as you get south of I-40 and start heading down south. And one of the things that we've done with some of our priorities of where we work on grassland restoration has to do with looking at migration corridors between their summer and winter range, but looking at bottlenecks or areas where we can focus the highest. You know, if you have a little bit of funds and you can make the biggest difference, that's basically what is the highest priority. But we're working within those priority corridors. We're working on all this stuff, whether it's winter range, summer range, or corridors. So this example of these animals coming from up north, basically Camp Navajo area, through Belmont and Garland Prairie, and then down along 89. So 89 becomes, there's still a few animals across 89 up here in the north, but it's a pretty big barrier to pronghorn. So they tend to, their migration is almost forced along the road down to Prescott. So looking at some of these high use areas I was showing you, like you can see these really thin bottlenecks of corridors. within these. And what this is animals using the gas line to travel through there, because that's the only grassland habitat they have left in some of these areas to get from point A to point B. So here's an example of where the Prescott is working on a project with us to open up the gas line corridor near Drake, and then the Kaibab's starting to work on one to do a little more work here on the north side of the boundary, so that bottleneck is opened up and easier, because those animals come through there really quick because they don't want to be there. And so here's an example of, this has just started. So this is the gas line. Prescott National Forest has started, like I said, the Drake Corridor project. So as they're starting to work on that, you can see starting to open up the area. So this is just the beginning. This will become more open through here. So those animals, if you look in the middle there, you can see a path. Those pronghorn, they're coming through there fast and they're sticking as close to the middle as they can because they don't want to be picked off on the outsides. So this is some camera photos along a fence that's along that gas line corridor, and a lot of animals use that corridor to get down to Prescott. Once you get down to Drake, the cement plant, basically, we have a group of animals that'll go around this way and cross Hell Canyon. And this is hot off the press. This is some of the animals using that gas line to cross Hell Canyon. You can see how steep that is. You know, when there's a need to migrate, there's a way. Those animals that have ingrained in them to migrate, they do some pretty challenging things to get there. They'll also, on one of our crossings, so this is the gas line, and that was where they were crossing at, where I showed that video. So that's just a little sliver they can do. They can't go over here anymore because they can't get across 89, so they have to find other ways to get down here. So they cross Hell Canyon. One of the other things we have is some of the animals will go this way towards, so this is Jerome area over here. And there's animals that go all the way down there, and they used to connect to this herd here in Sedona. This herd is now fragmented. We're trying to work with the forest to reconnect that herd. That's when you talk about fragmented herds, that's a good example of that. And so those animals come across, and there we go, just faded in. So they cross the Verde River. They actually will walk across the river over here east of where Hell Canyon and the Verde River meet. So that's one of the other crossings. What they're headed over to is some habitat, some grassland habitat where they can fawn. And you can see this fence within that grassland habitat has been modified, so it's real easy for pronghorn to get under that, but it still retains livestock. So it's a good way to do that. And then the animals on this side, there's 2 or 3 or 4 little corridors that they come, interestingly, over the mountains to the Prescott area, which I was surprised by. So now we've made this move down through Perkinsville, past, now we're getting into Prescott. And now it starts to get into probably some of the most challenging things is development. Like out there, we can clear trees, we can put in some instances wildlife crossings, but when you get into the developed areas, you got to do a lot of things. There's so many moving parts when you get into developed areas. So one of the projects, as I get down to the north end there, was at one point there was a project called the Great Western Extension that was being discussed, and it still occasionally is discussed. But as part of that project, Game and Fish was funded to collar pronghorn to see if this were to go in, where would be a good place for wildlife crossings in that. And so this is kind of what that data looks like. This was in 2010, and you can see here the development, where the areas are developed, those pronghorn aren't there because they can't be there. There's no way for them to get there. So at that time, you could see some of the fragmentation that was happening, but also I want you to notice 89. There's animals crossing that in 2010. So we recollared these animals, and this for a different project. This never really came to fruition, and I don't know if it ever will. But it was good learning to see the fragmentation and see what was kind of going on in there. So, but this is a close up of that data, and so like I said, you can see the developed areas in there. And then you can see there was a couple animals, almost a filter. Some of the animals were getting across 89, some were not. Fast forward to 2023, and we still see some animals getting across. It's because the traffic volumes haven't hit that threshold that they can't cross. but it's probably not far from it. If 89A were expanded, it's probably the end of that movement across there. So these animals, and like I said, we didn't collar animals down here. We all know there's pronghorn down here in this area. There's a lot of them still, but they weren't collared, so that's not really representative. This isn't saying that there's less pronghorn down here than up here. This is just a function of where we caught them for that particular project. But if you collared animals down here, you would see similar trends. You would see areas where they're developed that can get across roads or whatever. So this kind of gives you an idea that some of these areas that are disconnected. Up here in 89, we get animals crossing north of Chino, but we don't really get them crossing south of Chino much anymore because the traffic volumes have gotten too high in there. You see, 89 and Fane Road now are so busy. Every now and then, I actually marked a dead pronghorn there last year, and so they still cross occasionally, but not very often. So basically, giving an idea of habitat and development in this area. You can see areas. I just kind of outlined some of the areas that are developed just in general, and then if you bring in there's some more development. Some of it's a little more open than others. But what you are generally seeing is areas where there's major roads and highways. If you combine that with the development, remember I was showing the example of the grass squares getting cut up into smaller and smaller pieces. That's what's kind of happening in areas like this, where we're seeing areas that are completely fragmented. We see areas that are almost fragmented. We see areas that are still available, and so this is just an example. I mean, I didn't have the stuff to the west of 89 here or south of 169, but this is an example of what's kind of going on there. So there's still some opportunities, and there's a lot of planning going on in the county and Yavapai, in Prescott Valley and Simcoe, and there's still opportunities here, but you can see why now's the time to be doing it for sure, because it's moving pretty quick, a lot of this stuff. So planning development with wildlife in mind. So where possible, avoiding migration corridors or high-use areas. If not possible, consider wildlife corridors through whatever it is, whether it's residential, commercial, solar, whatever it may be. Account for future developments by rounding the hard edges, and I'll show you what I mean by that example. Fences in pronghorn areas should be minimum of 18 inches from the ground. Smooth wire, 20 is better, because they squeeze under there a little bit easier. And this works for, like I said, for solar, commercial, residential, lots of different developments. So basically, if you've got two habitat blocks where you've got a lot of pronghorn and you have a corridor that's connecting them, trying not to build stuff right in the middle of that corridor if you can, or in the habitat block if you can. Putting it over here is better, but that's not always possible. So then you have to start, if you can't, then you got to start considering how do you get those animals through those areas that are being developed. So if you have an area that's developed, and those animals have to go all the way around, you don't know what that distance is going to be, but if you add corridors through the development, it gives them opportunities to still be able to move from point A to point B, and we still have, whatever development needs to happen can still happen. So it's kind of an example there. And also looking at corridors, you can see, for development, if the corridor is a lot shorter, it may not have to be as wide as a corridor that's a lot longer. So it's just kind of a general layout. Like if a pronghorn comes to an area where it's only, very narrow, and they have to look, a mile this way, they're probably not going to do it. But so that you have to think about that and take each situation as it comes and be able to work with that. And then one of the other things I talked about rounding corners, a lot of times we're working with land blocks like state land, private, and thinking about, as you develop areas, rounding those corners if you can, so that the next development can also provide an opportunity for animals to move through there. And you can think about this with a lot of different species, but this is just one example of that. So not having it just dead end because there's nowhere to go, but having it where there's a way through. And sometimes these are opportunities that can work there. So here's an example. This isn't necessarily the best example, but it's just to show you. Here's an area where it's open and animals could get in here, but now the other end of that is blocked off. So you could think about how you could expand that as you're working with development. So some of the things that we've seen are City of Buckeye and White Mountain Regional Connectivity Initiative. There's places they've come up with general plans where they can put in, things like making recommendations for wildlife corridors, being able to provide buffers. This would look different for a pronghorn. This is just a general for like a deer or something down in Buckeye. But you can see how those kind of things can kind of work together, and planning development with open spaces and being able to have animals be able to travel through those. And so I wanted to touch on this at the beginning, but I couldn't figure out how to fit it in. So this is actually northern Arizona, back up by Flagstaff again. But I want to show you how, thinking about things like solar, we can see how this works. So if you get a chance, there's a New York Times article out there called "The Planet Needs Solar Power. Can We Build It Without Harming Nature?" And so that came out in early 2024. And it's a project that I've been working on for a long time, and we're working with Babbitt Ranches and the solar facility up there. And one of the things I showed you the pronghorn migrations earlier. This is the mule deer migrations using the same data, the same process, collaring animals, seeing where they go. And you can see there's two pretty major corridors from the peaks to the Grand Canyon. There's a whole bunch of corridors in there, but you can see some of the more major ones. And this is a lot of animals that are doing this, basically. And so the solar facility is being put in right in those corridors. So that, it's kind of like, oh man, well, that's not great. But luckily, they're working with us on connectivity, which is important. They don't have to. But Babbitt Ranches and CO Bar, they've actually worked with us and the developer to put different corridors here. We've got some half-mile wide corridors. We've got quarter-mile wide corridors, different corridors, and they've rounded the edges of some of these. They've taken those recommendations and actually implemented that. So, and it gives us an opportunity now to see how well this works. And so we're continuing to collar animals. In fact, we're collaring more animals in October to continue to follow this as it's built. And then many years after that, to see what's working and what's not working. So it's a great opportunity for an experiment. And I think that this is the kind of stuff we need to do. I mean, we're going to grow. Arizona's going to grow. We need to be able to try to grow with it in these ways. So this is an example of how that can happen. So you can see some of the challenges. I'll recap them. I'm just showing the roads here. Roads are a big challenge. You see these animals coming all the way from Grand Canyon to Prescott, and then there's even animals still down here south of Prescott. Fences are a challenge. Fenced roads are even more of a challenge. That's where I didn't say that, but that's one of the biggest challenges. If you have an unfriendly fence in a road, there's no way. And then vegetation. I mentioned about vegetation, juniper encroachment, other vegetation, and then development. So some of the solutions: wildlife crossings helps with the roads. Fence removals and modifications can help with the fences. Grassland restoration or vegetation management can help with those issues. And then, corridors and habitat blocks within and through development. So if you can bring all this together, you can start to see a bigger picture approach to this. And so I hope that helps you understand why I wanted to talk about much bigger area. Now you kind of know where your pronghorn in this area fit into this. So okay.